A living president just put his name on the most symbolic art stage in America. And it happened so fast, it almost feels like a dare. The Kennedy Center is now being branded with a new title that includes President Trump right next to John F. Kennedy. If that sounds like a small detail, you're already behind. Subscribe right now, no excuses, because the next moves here won't come with a warning, and the quiet changes are the ones that rewrite the country without asking you. This is not about a sign. This is about ownership of national meaning. This is about who gets to stamp their name onto a place that was built as a memorial, and what it says when a memorial becomes a branding slot. Here's what's confirmed. The board that oversees the Kennedy Center voted to rename the institution to include President Trump's name alongside President Kennedy's. The new branding reads like a fusion, a living political figure attached to a memorial legacy. And the official defense is simple and sharp. The vote, they say, recognizes that the current chairman saved the institution from financial ruin and physical destruction. That is the justification being pushed into the public. Now stop, breathe, look at what that sentence actually does. It turns a national memorial into a scoreboard. It turns a cultural institution into a trophy case. It tells the public this place has an owner, and the owner deserves his label on the building. And the second you accept that logic, you're not arguing about art anymore. You're arguing about power. Because the Kennedy Center isn't just another venue. It sits in Washington, D.C. as a cultural landmark with federal roots and national symbolism. People don't just perform there. They get validated there. They get crowned there. They get remembered there. So when the name changes, the message changes, and the message is the real currency. Now here's the part that spikes the tension. Some members of the Kennedy family are furious, not mildly annoyed, not politely concerned. Some are saying this is confusing. Some are calling it weird. Some are calling it obsessive. And the core question they're throwing back is brutal. Why would a living president want his name attached to a memorial that already carries the legacy of a late president? Why insert yourself into a space designed to honor someone else? And even more, why do it now and why do it this way? Because the process matters as much as the outcome. Reports say that when President Trump took office, he moved quickly to reshape the board, removing Democratic members and replacing them with supporters. So that board vote doesn't land like a neutral civic decision. It lands like a rebuilt control panel. And that's the first major insight most people are missing. This is not just culture. This is governance through culture. This is institutional capture, executed quietly, then revealed loudly. And if you think that's dramatic, ask yourself one simple question. If the board hadn't been reshaped, would this vote have happened? That's the question nobody can comfortably answer. Now let's get into the legal heat, because this is where the story gets sharper. Critics argue that the Kennedy Center's name is protected by federal statute, and that changing it officially would require an act of Congress, meaning a board can update a website, push a brand, hang letters, but it may not be able to rewrite the formal legal identity without lawmakers. So you have two realities colliding, the legal reality and the public reality. And here's the move being attempted. Win the public reality first. Because once the cameras show a new name, once search engines index it, once tourists repeat it, once ticketing pages print it, the public reality starts to feel permanent, even if the legal reality is still contested. That's modern power. You don't have to win the law on day one. You just have to make the change real enough that reversing it looks impossible. Now listen carefully, because this next part is where the angle gets darker and more original. Naming is not decoration. Naming is ownership without purchasing the entire building. It's a psychological deed. Every time someone says the name out loud, they repeat the owner. Every time a photo is taken in front of the building, the name becomes the frame. Every time an artist says, "I'm performing at," the label is spoken into the culture like a spell. That's why this matters, because culture is not neutral. Culture is soft power, and soft power is how you reshape a country without passing a bill. So when people say, "Who cares, it's just letters," they are broadcasting ignorance of how nations actually work. Nations don't run only on laws. They run on symbols, rituals, memory, and status. Now let's talk about the speed, because speed tells you intent. This shift happened quickly. Website changes, branding changes. And reports suggest physical signage moved at a pace that does not feel normal for a major institution. Why does that matter? Because speed is a weapon. Speed is how you create a new reality before opposition can coordinate. Speed is how you force critics into reaction mode, and reaction mode is where people lose, because the debate shifts from "should this happen" to "how do we undo what already happened?" That is a completely different fight. Now, here's what most coverage won't say directly, but it's the core. This is not only about President Trump. This is about a method where you reshape a board, secure control, take a vote, update branding, and dare anyone to stop you. And that method can be reused on museums, on libraries, on memorials, on commissions, on anything that relies on boards, appointments, and public symbols. So the bigger question is not, do you like this name change? The bigger question is, are we entering an era where national symbols can be rebranded through internal control rather than public consent? Because once you normalize that, everything becomes negotiable. Now, let's hit the emotional core without going graphic. President Kennedy's name has been tied to that building for decades as a memorial. For many Americans, that name is connected to a presidency cut short, a national shock, and an unfinished legacy. So when you attach a living president's name to that memorial, you aren't just adding credit. This move does three things at the same time. First, it transfers cultural legitimacy, because the Kennedy Center is a legitimacy machine. If your name sits on it, you borrow the institution's prestige every single day. Second, it reframes the role of the arts in Washington, because when a major cultural hub becomes overtly branded with a living political figure, it changes the behavior of everyone around it. Artists calculate, even if it gets reversed, even if Congress steps in. The attempt itself teaches a lesson. Symbols are up for grabs if you can control the mechanics. Now, here's the question you should be asking every 20 seconds as this escalates. What else is being redesigned quietly while everyone stares at the headline? Because naming fights are distractions and signals at the same time. Not because they're weak, because they're strategic. Because the culture you get tomorrow depends on what people are willing to risk today. Now, another question. Why would a board want this? If you believe their public claim, they're rewarding leadership for saving the institution. But if you look at incentives, there's another possibility. Branding is a power shield. Once a building carries a living president's name, criticism of the building can be reframed as criticism of the president. That's a defensive layer. It turns institutional debate into political combat, and political combat is easier to control than nuanced institutional debate. Now, let's get to the two scenarios, because this story is not done. Scenario 1, the moderate path. Watch the mechanics. Watch whether Congress moves. Watch whether courts intervene. Watch whether major donors or major artists take a public stance. Watch whether the programming shifts quietly. Because the next chapter will not be announced with sirens. It will be written through appointments, votes, branding updates, and silence. And one last thing, this is the line that should stay in your head. A memorial is supposed to point backward in honor, not forward in branding. The moment a memorial becomes a branding slot, you're watching the rules change in real time. Subscribe now if you want this followed without fluff, without fear, and without the usual scripted noise. And if you know someone who still thinks symbols don't matter, send this to them, because the people who understand symbols are already moving them, fast. And what happens next is going to decide whether this stays a controversy or becomes the blueprint.